The man of the hour.
How goes the battle, brother?
We're here. Coffee's ready. Got cream in it. Got water. I'm good to go. I love that cup, man.
Well, I'm trying to figure out these didn't cost that much, but I'm finding them for $15 a piece. That's too much in production costs. So, I don't want to charge $25 for a cup, right? So I've got to find out where they were made for a better price. But this is an 11 ounce. What I like is the 15 ounces, and I can't find a 15 ounce one that's proper.
See if the audience can figure it out. That was a challenge. I just threw down the gauntlet, boys.
Well, I mean, I basically want a copy of the Starbucks mug, which is a 15 ounce, but instead of the this handle, it has a traditional handle with a curved in bottom. And while these are great for these are 3 fingers, right? These are 3-finger mugs. I prefer the 2-finger on top and the 3 below.
Like this.
Correct. That's the correct handling. This is a little I drink in a bar, right?
Right.
Now pull up yours. I'm a little drunk, right? That's I have coffee, and the little teacup one, that's I have tea for ladies. Now most people don't realize people actually thought of this shit, right? They actually thought of the difference in handle shape representing different classes. But they represent classes. Now, if you don't know that, you might just see them as different handle shapes. But when I see them, it bothers me.
I'm sorry it bothers you. That's not good. It's not one of those things that I derive joy from.
Well, it's like studying art, right? Studying anything, you just get really sensitive to a lot of things. Like, for example, I'm not really sensitive to symbolism in art because those are little cultural things that, and some of them are made, just nonsense. But you get used to the different types of signals used in artwork, right? I mean, and that's really interesting because you see group evolutionary strategies expressed in art. My favorite difference is, of course, the Greek and Roman, perfect man, ideal man. The romantic Renaissance version of man, right, which is a little plumper, right, a little more well-fed. And then you have the German art, which most people don't realize is a very bloody art. So if you see Christ on a cross, he's got like 6 arrows in him. There's blood dripping down and the whole thing, right? I mean, and he's really looks like he's suffering. And you go to China and you see how they represent humans, and they're communicating their disgust for human beings the way that the Greeks are communicating their treatment of human beings as gods in the making, or at least Greeks as gods in the making. And so you start to see these differences, right? And so one of the things you get if you first look at art is you tend to project your own feelings on it. There are some universal feelings like the use of scale, right? If you can't make it good, make it big. And if you can't make it big, make it red. And if that fails, make it look like a dick or a shark, right? I mean, they're just basic things that are general among humans. And then there's basic technological changes like the Egyptian poses, right? These are idealized things, but they actually didn't have perspective, right? And then of course you get to the point where Michelangelo can make a sculpture out of like the Pietà. He can make a sculpture out of marble that looks like it could melt, right? It's so perfect. It has real mass. Right. So, but you look around the world and how people think about the world is in their art. They can't help it. Just like you can't help express how you think about the world in your vocabulary. Right. And in your ethics and morals. And most people don't understand their group evolutionary. I mean, almost nobody understands their group evolutionary strategy. So they just take that as a metaphysics of how the world is. The most comical being Europeans think that we're normal, right? Because that's a common cognitive bias, right? You have to think you're normal. We all think we're more normal than we are, right? And when we're the weirdest fucking people on the planet, and expecting other people to act as weird as we do, which is high trust and all this high investment in the commons at personal expense. We just take it for granted that people are like that. Well, I mean, it's the same thing expressed in leftism, right? They think that they believe that everybody will be charitable and equalitarian because that's what they'd like, even though if they are put in a circumstance like that, they will eventually gravitate to selfish behavior. So, I mean, people are, I don't know. I think art was, at least for me, I say this all the time. I studied war and then art before I studied economics and law. And it just provided me with a very interesting view of humanity when you look at the world through art, which is really the reason we should teach it, right? We should teach the history of the world as the development of the technology of arts and the introduction of whatever we do. And we should get into politics last.
I like
because
that.
it's really art, technology, economy, politics, and geography and politics. I mean, that's really the whole thing. Like, we don't go back to the Middle East and separate the empires of bronze from the empires of iron, nor do we understand that those are possible, because it's actually possible to get the three components together for bronze, right?
Right. It's a challenge. It's amazing because this tin supply seems to have been the short.
It's hard. It's not where you want it to be.
They had to go to Wales, I think, to get it. I'm like, wow.
All over the place. Afghanistan is one of those places where nobody wants to be there. It's completely inhospitable and hospitable to human life, yet there are resources, right? Similar to Siberia.
I
Anyway.
have to ask this question before we get off the subject, which is, do you have plans for a potential black swan tankards? I think that's what we need too.
Oh, we need tankards instead of coffee cups.
Oh, tankards.
I'm way too effete of a snob to do that, right? I mean, I've been trying to hide it in my efforts to become more acceptable to the unwashed masses. But honestly, I'm the most effete, snobbish prick there is.
Well,
so yes, I will I guess can have my arm twisted to produce. I can go from this ham-fisted coffee cup with a large handle to a drunken dullard
tankard, baby,
full tankard handle, because that's what you got to be able to hold on to when you're inebriated.
I would look at these. My dad had these things that my granddad had these. They are German tankers with the lid on top, like ceramic things. My
father served in Germany, so he was in Air Force intelligence. He served in Germany, and he brought back all these with him. I'm pretty sure because I know this, he said this repeatedly throughout his life, is he wished he'd never left
Germany.
Yeah,
I understand.
He wished he'd never left the military and never left.
Huh. Well, here we are.
Some guys are just. We don't have a way. We don't have a way of retaining those guys. And we really need to, because there's some people, they're just more fit for careers. And it's okay to be a specialist for 30 years.
Yeah.
Right. There's no reason you can't be, right? There's just no way. We just have too many guys that when they come back, it's just, you go from where you have little choice, but that you have this camaraderie that can't be achieved anywhere else, right? You have that thing that is the origin of religion, that incredible inclusiveness. And I mean, as anybody, if you haven't served in the the military's changed a lot because Clinton, Obama really ruined it. But if you go, at least you go back in history, that's a really binding. I mean, that's the origin of religion, is organized religion, is the initiatic brotherhood of warriors. So anyway, we have just too many guys that belong in that, right? That world. I would have loved it. I just couldn't. I was, my asthma does not 20-mile marches with pack, tolerate.
It's just not part of the game.
Anyway, so I went off on a couple of rants there. What I wanted to say was, I don't know if I don't really have a lot of ability to self-monitor, but I can tell from my writing that my brain is coming back. So just over the past 2 days, my brain is coming back. So hopefully trend continues.
That's right.
Right. So anyway, and ideas are coming. There's also something that's happened, is that some subconscious autistic switch, because really what I was worried about happening, I said earlier that there was going to be there should be a shift this year as what we call a correction begins. And I said a couple of weeks ago or a week ago that I sort of expected it to happen in January, but I hadn't seen any signals of it. But you can see the signals now, and so can the big boys, because they were trying to maximize their taking this year, right? Their recent returns for 21, and what's happened since the first is you can see an incredible shift as they try to move to stocks that maintain indexes and price while they clear out of things that they think are going to collapse. And so we're really, and so what that's doing is it's causing indexes to hide the halving of value that's occurred, right? And it's so it's obscuring that, and this is the problem of aggregates, of course, right? This is the problem of using an aggregate index, is that it's only good if if it's actually an aggregate. So excuse me, if the aggregate actually describes an even distribution. So, but what's happening is that shift has happened, and you see it working its way through now. So once the big boys say, we've got to defend our money, then you start to see it. And so we have this perfect storm emerging. And I think what that's done is that's clicked off one of the autistic switches in my head, which has helped me too. All right. So anyway, what are we going to talk about today? Yesterday, we had started on first principles, basically started with creating the series. What are series? They are they're a set of first principles. The reason you produce them in series is so they're not ideal types, right? In other words, they're not categorical measures, they're empirical measures, right? They're spectral, or at least they're qualitative measures if they're not cardinal measures. So it prevents you from making category comparisons of things that are actually incommensurable, or if they're not incommensurable, they're too easily conflated. And when they're too easily conflated, they're open to conflation by bias or intent. So most of what we're trying to do with first principles in series is produce measurements that prevent misrepresentation and misunderstanding. That's a nice way of saying preventing deception, whether it's self-deception or other deception.
We could call it error prevention.
Yes. I mean, most of what we do is via negativa, right? I mean, that's we always think of everything in the positive, but what we're really doing with increasing precision is we're we're preventing the negative, right? We're preventing negatives. So we went through this a bit of it. I wanted to, but because we're doing that, I thought I would raise the. I would reiterate what it is we're doing.
That's good.
Right, and why we're doing it, because it's incredibly hard to grasp that what we're doing is much closer to math than it is to language, right? Right. Language is meant to convey meaning, right? Meaning. But look, it's like math when we use things fall down has meaning. Right? The law of gravity, x squared, whatever. That's math. That is a measurement of it. So there's the concept and there's the measurement. Well, how can we act? What degree of precision can we act on things fall down? Well, at human scale, there's a scale at which you don't want things to fall down, right? But when you get beyond human scale and you're trying to do logic and comparison and reasoning and calculation, you need a more granular measurement. You need a law, not a rule of thumb. And a law will provide some answer, and hopefully of what's called scale independence.
Right.
And this is the big problem. Math is naturally scale independent because it's an ordinal system, a positional name. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, right? These are unambiguous positions in an unambiguous order, but it says nothing about the scale. Something that's 9,999,999, units, or 10 to the 47th unit at the subatomic scale is still absolutely tiny, right? I mean, because that's a context, right? But at the scale of miles, it's really fucking far, right? Or kilometers, or light years, it's really far. So that's what's called scale independence. So the system of measurement, the words we use to refer to states, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The words we use to refer to states in mathematics are scale independent because it's ordinal. Mathematical numbers are only ordinal or positional. They're not spatial. In other words, they don't have a scale attracted. That's the value of math, is that what we do with all sorts of mathematics is we try to produce scale. We try to provide commensurability by producing correlations between scales. I mean, what's statistics? It's an attempt to unify different scales so that we can see how they relate to each other.
Okay.
I can't figure out how nerdy. It's like you're always this
Good,
problem.
you're doing good. You're doing good.
I can't figure out how nerdy to get because there's always more detail, but then you lose the audience. So, but the point here is that numbers are scale independent. That's why we have all this goofy, silly language in mathematics about infinities and limits and whatever, because in the absence of context, right, application of a mathematical rule, we have no scale. So we have no decidability. This makes sense? So there's a couple of things here. Scale independence.
Right.
And then we have ordinal decidability. We have cardinal decidability. And we have contextual decidability. We think of as applied measurements.
Okay.
Okay, now. We are trying to create a system of measurement for the scope, a scale independent measurement for the scope of human experience, right?
I would say it a bit more broadly to encompass the scale of potential human experience.
Correct. Correct.
Just awe-inspiring.
Right. It is, however, not infinite.
That's right.
Correct. So the number of things we can reduce to analogy to experience, whether it be physical, cognitive, or emotional, right? Sensory, physical, cognitive, rational, or intuition, experiential. The number of things we can do there isn't infinite. Right? It may have infinite variation, like for example, the colors our eyes can see. There is a limit to it, but for most purposes, it's nearly infinite, right?
Right.
There is a limit to the number of ways we can organize our limbs in order to do something, right? It isn't infinite. It's just large, right? There's a maximum rate at which we can think and talk, speak and speak, right? These aren't infinite. There's a maximum number of things we can hold in our mind at one time. There's a maximum things we can compare at one time and synthesize into a model. So there are all sorts of limits that exist. Do we need a cardinal measure for all of those things? Not really, because we don't sense perceive cardinally. We sense perceive competitively.
Want you to distinguish that a little bit more clearly.
We roughly see if the thing's the same or different.
Thank you. That was good. That was my scale. Right on the money.
And that's why we call the brain or at least Babbage, a difference engine, because we see differences, and we produce organization out of differences, out of harmonizing differences.
Right.
I don't want to get too many layers deep here because I'll lose myself as well as the audience. So we are trying to produce a scale independence. In other words, a system of measurement for the scope of human perception, right? Sense, perception, reason, calculation, computation, and valuation, which is emotion. And the number of, just like in math, there's one dimension, position. But in the human beings, I just labeled 4 faculties, right? And of those 4 faculties, each one of them has some number of dimensions. So just as we can, in math, you can create a 2-dimensional drawing, a 3-dimensional drawing, and we can represent 4 dimensions with change in drawings. And at some point, you can produce mathematical objects of n dimensions, right? There are some number of dimensions in every single one of our faculties, our 4 sets of faculties. So it's not different from math in that sense, except that math's dimension is singular and cardinal, right? And our dimensions are each in 4 sets of faculties, and that there's a whole bunch of dimensions within each of them. We can ascertain this because we can observe it, as if anybody's gone through our section on grammars, in the organization of our language. Fundamentally, everything's a name, just like all numbers are just names, right? But that name consists of a reference and some properties that we can say in language are consistent. There are only so many dimensions in nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, and there's only one dimension to approval, disapproval, yes, no. Right. So you would think there would be a lot of dimensions, but there really aren't. Now, in each one of those dimensions, you might say, well, near, far, or whatever, right? Or heavy, or next to, or on top of, or there's all sorts of dimensions, but the number of dimensions isn't infinite, right? Furthermore, do all those measurements have in common? Those measurements all have in common our physical form and our faculties, right? Physical faculties. But what does our physical form and our faculties have in common with the rest of the universe? Evolutionary computation. Evolutionary computation works by a ternary logic. It has to, because the universe has no memory, which if I haven't explained that enough now, another time I'll go into.
Okay.
In other words, the universe can accumulate, but it can't remember and predict. In other words,
Right.
it can only create potential. It can't predict predictions and choose. And the universe had to make us in order to make that happen, which is kind of another way of looking at mankind. The universe had to make us in order to predict. And hopefully something like us will emerge that will defeat entropy so the universe can persist.
So I
mean, that's the one.
It's like an interesting function because it is we can detect and respond to temporal opportunities.
Yeah, so the universe can't. It can't choose. Gas molecules don't get to choose whether they bump into each other. Organisms don't really get much choice in reproduction until you get sex. And of course, sex increases the rate of evolutionary computation. We don't know if sex is simply the result of cooperation between mitochondria and some other cell that ate it, which is probably the initial cause, because there's too much value in that separation. But it wouldn't matter, because in the end, the universe can only do what you're doing, negative and positive. I mean, it's only got ternary states, right? So you're going to get that, which is, of course, why we end up with two sexes, because it's computationally, you require prediction if you get more, right? And you'll always, any more would be outcompeted by the rate of adaptation of just two sexes. All right, getting off track. So the point I was trying to make, that I was trying to get to, is that we have developed concepts that are not scale independent. When we say that we've developed specializations, we've developed systems of measurement within each specialization and vocabulary within that specialization. And some of these specializations are harmonious: physics, chemistry, biochemistry, right? Life, etc. Right? And some of them are not: physics and behavioral science. Right? Behavioral science is unscientific, right? It's non-correspondent with reality. So the problem is, now think of it as a hierarchy of the mathematics, the physical world, the chemical world, the biological world, the organism world, right? The complex organism world, the ecology, etc. Just go up in some, and then at some point you get you fork between ecology and thinking, sentience, right?
Okay.
Right. So you move from the material to the biologic to the asexual biological to the sexual, which is in other words, the to the what's the eukaryotic, right? From the biologic to the eukaryotic to the sexual to the or to the complex organization. These are all just increases in cooperation, right? So chemicals cooperate, right? Biochemicals cooperate, they do work, right? Whereas physical chemistry doesn't do it. And so what occurs is that we've developed these vocabularies for each one of those sets of stable relations at which cooperation occurs, right? Waves cooperate into particles, particles cooperate into atoms, atoms cooperate into molecules, molecules cooperate into aggregates, aggregates create into different complex organizations, which end up eventually producing life, right? Which produces all the huge range of evolutionary computation that can exist once you have that system of doing work, right? Capturing energy and doing work rather than being made by energy, which is the physical world gets made by energy, and then the only work that happens is dissipation, right? Whereas life actually accumulates, right? So in other words, it finds free energy and captures it and turns it into mass, which is very interesting. I mean, technically speaking, like crystalline structures do something like this. They grow, right? But life can adapt to a broader array of circumstances. Right?
That's right.
Right. So that's why bacteria rules the universe. Right? So anyway, so I hopefully I've got the idea that there's this pyramid from a very small number of basic rules with a small number of dimensions, but we've developed a vocabulary. So the problem is our language consists of these vocabularies, right? And those vocabularies and that specialization, especially the biases that are unscientific in our behavioral sciences, all those things are somewhat incommensurable. And because of their incommensurability, they promote a failure of completing the Wilsonian synthesis of the physical, behavioral, and physical or organic, behavioral, and evolutionary sciences. Right? They forget that. So, what is it we are trying to do? We're trying to enumerate those dimensions and capture whatever word we can out of all those vocabularies that is the most scale independent. And if it's not scale independent, redefine it with scale independence. So what happens when we use a term is we understand it as universal scale independent. But when other people hear that term, they still see the context dependent definition of that term and its relations.
So I would say they see it as a term of art.
Correct.
Okay, that's
and we're saying it's a number. Right? It's the equivalent of a number.
That makes you very rude.
Right. Well, but it is, because all we're talking about is a position and an order. That's right. Why we call it exhaustive disambiguation into a system of measurement of constant ordinal relations. They're not cardinal. We don't need them to be cardinal. We just need them to be ordinal.
Right.
And we can't, it doesn't make any difference to make them cardinal because the things aren't cardinally commensurable.
Right.
I mean, light and vision frequency is cardinally commensurable, right? But and frequency of sound waves is commensurable. But what does that have to do with light? Right? Our eyesight. Right? So how do you cardinally make commensurable the vast, extraordinary computation to time 200 muscles as you do jumping jacks?
Wow, yeah.
Right? Or as you run. Right? I mean, you look at these contortionists, right? I mean, Russians are great at this stuff, right? Look at that. And what do you have to do to make your body do that?
I don't know.
Right? Or
because I don't know how to do that.
Right? Or the things like I can hit a baseball, right? I can, because it's not really size dependent, right? I can hit a baseball. It's the only thing I got because I was small. It's the only thing I got picked for, right? I can hit a ball. You put me up there, I'll hit a ball in the outfield, right? Otherwise, Doolittle's the second smallest guy in the class, right? He's not going to get the ball fast. He's not going to catch it more. He's not going to throw it harder. But I can hit a ball, right? So, but I mean, basketball is the thing. I had a basketball who played basketball all the time, right? Had it in my yard, did it every day. I suck at basketball because I'm 5'6", right? And whatever that is, that thing of throwing the ball correctly, I don't have the fine motor skills for it. Right? But you see guys, I mean, they'll like throw the 3-pointers from over there, from any with all sorts of different complex bodily movements, and that's great. So there's no value in cardinal. There's only value in example. Does that make sense? So the way you solve ordinal is by triangulation. Is this thing more or less of something? Right, by triangulation. So that's when I say competitive. Right, things are determined by their competitiveness by triangulation. What is triangulation? It's just comparison, right? This is either equal, less, or more. That's all your brain does. It's it. And it tries to use triangulation to determine vast network of 100 billion computers, so to speak, that are tiny computers all working together to triangulate on what thing is going to get you the most shit in the shortest time at the least effort, at the lowest risk, at the shortest amount of time with the least effort, blah, blah, blah. Right? That's all it does. It just does that on a lot of things.
Right.
But a lot of things isn't infinite. There are only so many demonstrated human interests. So in any event, so the problem we're getting here is we're trying to produce a universal scale independent system of measurement across all disciplines, unifying all disciplines around a set of first principles from which we can falsify any claim in all of human experience and all future human experience.
That's a good one.
So again, we're doing the ordinal, there's mathematics is a positional or ordinal language that can be cardinal because of every unit in math is the same. Well, every unit in human behavior is not the same. Your sense of taste and mine are marginally indifferent for survival. But you probably have much better taste and smell than I do, right? Right, because I have terrible taste and smell because I've had surgery that's destroyed it, right? Yeah. So, there are people with far better biomechanical, basketball players, far better biomechanical movement than I have, right? So you have this incredible range, but they're marginally indifferent and they're within limits. In other words, that's different from cardinal. So what we're trying to do is just like every number is just a name. The name happens to state its position because we can look at the number and compare its position. The difference when we're creating series is we're trying to use names that are experiences, not abstractions, to represent measurements in a spectrum so that we can do triangulation, so that we can falsify tangent conflation or inference or whatever.
Right. So error checking.
We can also conversely increase the precision of our language so that we are able to speak extremely precisely about the world, and therefore not only show others that we know what we're talking about, but B, show ourselves we know what we're talking about or not. Because that, I can tell you from my experience in developing this, it's really, you find out really quick when you're wrong. I basically write proofs using this language. Do you know how many proofs I write that fail before I find one that doesn't? A lot. It sometimes it goes for years. So this is why it's so hard for people to grasp that. You can teach people math because it's naturally alien. So you have a compartment to put it in. But we have to create measurements out of things that are expressed by existing references. And so the way we do this is we create series, right? So we might do Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, right? We might create a color spectrum, right? We might create in other words, that's a spectrum, right? We might create an equilibrium, which is amoral, immoral, amoral, unethical, immoral, evil, and amoral, ethical, moral, virtuous. We might create that spectrum. We might create a ternary logic, right? Which is there are only three means of human coercion. And so this thing consists of three values that somewhere fit on this triangle, right? So we're trying to create a system of measurement for the same reason we need math as a measurement, because your perception of a football field and my perception of the length of a football field turn out to be quite different. My favorite example is when I was a kid, my father was horrible. When I was 5, I was supposed to take the garbage from the third floor or second floor, was it third floor? Second floor of this fucking 7,000 foot mansion out in the goddamn sticks, right? Down the stairs, out the door, through the yard, down the driveway to the old smokehouse in the fucking dark, open the smokehouse, right? Which is it's a stone building, right? Right? With the garbage cans inside that smell bad. And I'm fucking 5 years old. You know how terrified I was every time I took the garbage out?
No, I don't, but I get the picture.
You know, you get the idea, and besides the fact that distance to me as a kid, it seemed like a mile to me today, right? But, I went back there a couple of years ago to see my childhood. And, and it's like, it's not short, but it's not 100 yards, it's 50 yards or something, right? But when you've got a big dark barn over there and you've got the 7,000 foot stucco mansion is a 7,000 foot stucco mansion, right? You in your head as a kid, it's fucking haunted, right? Then there's the cornfields. Between the cornfields and you is a whole bunch of pine trees, and then there's the smokehouse and then the chestnut tree over it, and then there's that big dark barn, and then there's a road, the driveway goes around, there's a couple of barns over there that are big and dark. I mean, there be monsters there, right? So the thing is, your memory of scale as a child is based on your spatial consumption.
Right.
Right? But your measure in adult is based on your adult spatial consumption, right? So when your brain revisits that space, it feels the difference, because those measurements, which are just stored as a bunch of dot patterns, basically, they don't match up, right? And and you have to adjust them, reconfigure them. So this is the point of what am I making? What are you laughing?
No, it's good, man. I'm enjoying this show.
Oh,
it's interesting.
So what have we, in order to create the equivalent of mathematics, which is a set of names of positions, right, in an order, and a set of possible operations on them. How do we create a set of names for all the dimensions of human experience, right? How do we create those in a series of measurements? Right? Just like you would have gears in a clock or a mechanism, they have different ratios, and you need to be able to calculate. They're different sizes, different rates. Well, we have just like they have different teeth, we have different measures, right? Except we have more faculties than a gear, right? So how would you create a mathematics of the human experience that would allow you to falsify human experience as much as mathematics allows you to falsify human experience and those things that are cardinally measurable? How would you do that? Well, we would develop the laws of physics, right? And we would develop mathematics to describe them. Why? Because the universe can't choose. That's what being deterministic means, right? It means it can't choose. It consists of regular processes that don't vary, and variant processes. But human processes do vary, because we can remember, therefore we can predict, therefore we can adapt to seize opportunities in time. Yep. And so we need a system of measurement for human experience. And we have enough knowledge now we know what the first principles of the universe are. Right? We have the cognitive model for it, computation, because we didn't have that before. This is the problem in history. So we have computation as the model. Whereas mathematical logic can be taught as verbalism, or the verbal analogy, or mathematical Platonism or idealism, or it can produce as applied mathematics. We have the same problem in the measurements of human behavior. We can talk about them fictionally, as fictionalisms fictionally. We could talk about them as analogies, all right? We can talk about them as actions. So mathematical operations, physical operations. So we're trying to create just like mathematics should be stated operationally instead of ideally and verbally. We could, in order to prevent nonsense mathematics, which is what we've got right now, we want to be able to create an operational description of mankind. In other words, the least interpretable system of measurement consisting of discrete operations, Markov chains, on unique systems of measurement where we have names for different states. Those states are qualitative, more or less equal, right? But they're not quantitative. We might be able to make some of them quantitative, but it's the qualitative that determines human behavior, not the quantitative. Why? Because humans can't quantitatively think. Why? Because all those complex motions and thoughts and ideas are being done precognitively by a whole bunch of little computers in the very thin surface of your brain, right? Computing batches of fragments in a vast competition so that you don't have to think about each one. So what do we need to produce that system of measurement? We need a first principle from which all other things derive. In other words, just like mathematics, that's order. We need a first principle, evolutionary computation. Then we need a paradigm. That paradigm is the first principle, evolutionary computation. We need a vocabulary set of measurements, right? Where those measurements are organized into dimensions, specific weights and measures, right? Weights, volumes, and measures, etc. And we need a grammar, right? Which expresses the logic of those constant relations. That grammar is what we call operational language, because only operational language is complete. In other words, it makes no assumptions. It's testable.
Okay.
And that provides, and the grammar has one rule that we don't see, we have heretofore ignored, and is the source of all sophistry, which is the law of the universe is continuous, recursive, disambiguation. The law of grammar is continuous, recursive, disambiguation, until you've achieved an identity, a stable, non-conflatable, unique relations. So in a sense, a sentence consists of continuous, recursive, disambiguation of ideas into a stable relation we call a testable, unique, unambiguous state.
Sorry while I write that down.
Well, it's going to be here in the.
Yes, it is. All right.
So what's missed from our grammar, which is why we have, all philosophical sophisms are based on this one failure of grammar, which is continuous, recursive disambiguation.
Okay.
And while Chomsky is the one who put it in, Chomsky took Turing and put Turing into linguistic form. This is his phrase. I like to use him because it's a radical left. He's like the opposite of me. But I have to credit him with taking Turing and applying it to language, even though Chomsky is a profound liar. But what you do get is you say this is why the liar's paradox isn't one. Everything inside this box is a lie.
Right.
It's not continuously recursive disambiguation. Instead, the opposite. It relies on recursion to create ambiguity. So that's, in other words, it's a grammatically incorrect statement. It isn't confusing at all. It isn't a paradox. It's a lie. Okay. Well, on every quote deep philosophical question, almost everyone. I mean, I'm just trying to shit on philosophy as much as I can right now. Is that most philosophy relies on two things. One, the failure to include continuous recursive disambiguation for grammatical correctness. This is partly because of mathematics does this. And in other words, mathematics doesn't include it because mathematics is based on balances, not on operations. I don't want to get into that. So the second one is the use of the word is, which is an ambiguous. It means I don't want to put the work into stating the state of this thing, the existential state of this thing. So is the primary source, or the verb to be is, are, was, were, etc. These are means of claiming knowledge you don't have, knowledge you haven't demonstrated, and attributing causality where there is only some vague association or identity where there's some. So
what was that you said about identity?
Conflating identity where there's they're claiming an identity where there isn't one. For example, well, that is just X. Well, no, it isn't just X. There's a vague similarity between these things if you wish to reach to some fucking conflation, but causally there's no relationship at all, right? So most bullshit argument, most philosophical sophistry makes use of those two things on top of some bias. So when I say what we're doing is math, it's wordy and it sounds odd to you, it's because you think it's language, like philosophy or ideology or wisdom literature or normal discourse. It's not. It's fucking math, right? In the same sense that math is math. It's a system of measurement that falsifies arbitrary differences in human perception.
I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but that struck me as funny because it looks like your common use of language, and it is not. And it's bound to confuse people. It's like because it's so similar.
Now, with math, it's already alien to you. The problem is all these things aren't alien to you. With physics, you don't give a shit because it just makes you give more agency or more instinct. But you don't have to change because you know the law of gravity. You might not like the fact that heliocentrism, right? I mean, you might not like all these, and that Einstein probably would like that the galaxy was the universe. The galaxy is trivial compared to the universe, right? We don't like all these things. However, they're not really. None of us have a lot of investment in heliocentrism.
That's it. That's right.
But the minute you start talking about behavior and the mathematics of behavior, which is really what we consider economic logic, which is the logic of cooperation. When we're talking about that, you all of a sudden your illusions that you invest your self-worth in, or your status in, or that you've built, you're going to resist that like crazy. Now, religion, think about the resistance of fundamentalists, because we don't think of it this way, but fundamentalism is really sort of a new thing. We know when it happened. It happened because of the beginning of the scientific revolution. So all these fundamentalist sects emerged in a certain period of a similar period of time, right? As self-defense, because holy crap, I don't want to learn all this new stuff. I like my values and my stories and my parables. I don't like knowing their children's stories. Right? I don't like that I'm being indirectly programmed. Right? I like that I'm being indirectly, and I want to continue my status obtained from all the investment I've made in this. And frankly, I like how people behave. I mean, it's true. I mean, if ask all, like I know of other guys, we consider ourselves pagans, which is in the sense that we lionize heroes rather than, right? We hero figures, great figures of history rather than, I mean, right? So they all say, well, Christians are just better to be around. No, we all say the same thing. You want to live around Christians, you just don't want to buy that nonsense, right? So, or the same with Islam. You don't want to be around them, and you don't want to buy their nonsense, right? So I'm trying to see if I can create some agitation here, because I get so much reward out of your facial expressions, and I'm going through these long rants. So anyway, but when we have to adapt, you see, that's the trick, is none of us want to adapt. That's not really true. None of us, about 3% of us, find value in adaptation. We think it's interesting because we're not all malinvested in something that's outside of our control. But these people are. And so just as we can't defeat fundamentalism today, we can't defeat PC woke Marxism postmodernism, which is just a pseudoscientific revision of the false promises of theology.
I would agree.
We can't defeat them. People don't want to adapt. This is important because taking it to the end logical conclusion, those people are frauds. In other words, they're committing act of fraud by not paying the cost of adaptation necessary to create the conditions under which they live. So in essence, it's not just that they're wrong or they've got to change, but that they're criminals.
Okay.
I was hoping I'd get more out of you than that.
Well, it's like this. Yes, that it will be required the proof, right?
So in essence, so what are we trying to produce? We're trying to produce a paradigm consisting of first principles, consisting of vocabulary, each of which consists of measurement, a measurement in an ordinal series, just like mathematics, although there are n dimensionals. In other words, we have a lot of dimensions of measurement, right? They're equally ordinal, but they're not cardinal, right? Right? And that are necessary to measure any given aspect of human experience. The evidence that this is a limited set of measurements is already embodied in our language. It's especially embodied in the English language because the vocabulary is so large, right? And it combines German, Germanicized Latin, which we call French, and it contains Latin and Greek concepts. So you have class concepts, era concepts, right? And a huge selection of words to choose from. So it's easier to produce in English a set of measurements. Like one of the problems I've had in Slavic languages, but especially in Arabic, or certainly in Chinese, is there just aren't words for things that we take for granted, because they've never had the tradition of commons that we have, where commons is so important to us. But so English has an enormous number of words, and it's a very technical language because we chose a new word over compound words, whereas Germans choose compound words over new words, right? So we, as the man says, Europeans not only rape and pillage in war, but we rape and pillage languages for every piece of vocabulary we can weasel out of them, right? We mug languages and steal their change, right? So language is a good language for producing this system of measurement. And so what we are trying to do then is say what we've got the very first principle, evolutionary computation, why we can work that principle up through every layer of what we would call cooperation or interaction from the physical world all the way up into group evolutionary strategies. Right? We can cover that whole spectrum with this single first principle determining the system of measurement used within that first principle for everything that's sensory perceivable within it. Right?
Yes.
So it's fucking hard. Okay, I'm sorry. You know. The thing is, what?
It's going to take some work.
It takes a little bit of work, right? Now, if you know economics and the scientific method, you know, basic physics, basic economics, the problems, the scientific method and why it exists, it's a lot easier for you. If you have some access to mathematics, it's a little bit easier, but if you know programming, it's a lot easier. Why? Because just as mathematics is essentially verbal, programming is operational. It's much closer to a sequence of actions, right? Which is what humans do. And just as what we call AI, which really isn't, it's Bayesian Bayesian accounting, just like Bayesian accounting is a lot closer to what our brains do. So with those, we have what our brains do, Bayesian accounting or AI, what our actions do, algorithms, and what our words do, mathematics and set theory. But the logic is the same across them. It's just what are you including, right? So that's it, right? So that's what we're trying to do is the best way to explain it is we're trying to develop a mathematics of human behavior, a universal mathematics of human behavior. In other words, a system of, as in mathematics is a system of measurement that allows us to test or falsify any given statement. Test, false, compare, test, and falsify any given set of statements. All right, and to produce an incredibly precise language that allows us to produce decidability, whether it's truth or falsehood of propositions. And we can do that across the entire spectrum of human knowledge. So when I say PLaw completes the scientific method, in other words, it completes the system of measurement, the scientific method, and the Wilsonian synthesis, is that it creates a universal system universal system of measurement that's based on first principles that unites all the sciences.
Yes, in the spectrum of potential human experience.
Yes. Whether the problem is, if you want a measurement, you have to be able to perceive its differences. It's, your difference engine. So everything we have has to be reducible to a system. Well, if you fully account for the human faculties, you fully accounted for every sense. What does instrumentation mean? It means we've extended our senses. Well, writing, math, and operationalism, what we're talking about, these are extensions of our senses, because we don't have, without writing mathematics and algorithms, we can't retain all that in our minds. Some very strange people can do certain things, but most of us have to write it down.
Right.
So this isn't ideology. It isn't theology. It isn't philosophy. It isn't ideology, right? It's the completion of the unification of the sciences in a set of grammars which represent a set of systems of measurement for truth as well as falsehood across all human experience, including the four sciences of the logics, the formal sciences, the physical sciences, the behavioral sciences, and the evolutionary sciences, which represent the physical sciences before state, the behavioral sciences, the during state, evolutionary sciences, the after state, and logics as the means of describing them. So this is why PLaw is such a leap. But it's a leap because it's the idea that it can exist is alien. The idea that even the idea, in other words, the idea that it can exist, that everything is decidable, even our differences in morals and values and whatever, the idea that everything's decidable because everything's an expression of one law of the universe is just incomprehensible. I didn't like set out to do this. It just happened, right? I'm an autistic idiot that happens to obsess on minor things, and I have I like to call it a talent, but I have a defect that doesn't allow me to tolerate logical inconsistencies, right? And so it just fucking happens over 20 years that I come up with it, but it's non-trivial, and that's why it's hard, right? So what we're doing in series, right? When we're producing these series that you and I are talking about, we're producing the system of measurement. That system of measurement consists of the series, one of the series of which is reciprocity, one of which is true, within reciprocity and truth, and within truth there is there are the grammars, but the grammars constitute all forms of logic. In other words, all forms of reasoning, including the logic of lying. So we've got this beautiful little hierarchy of the entire fucking universe, right? Of all social constructions. And what we've done is, just like we've got the physical world, we tend to do the subatomic. Well, there's one we don't know yet. The quantum, the particle, or the quantum field, whatever, the particle level, the atomic level, the chemical level, the biochemical level, the organic level, right? All the way up. We've got this whole thing. We've essentially, you can think of each of those states as having a logic within it, a grammar, right? We've just continued that grammar all the way across and identified what the common logic is across all of them. Right? So we have a universal system of measurement that's capable of falsifying and therefore testing the truth, the testifiability of any statement a human can make about any subject, regardless of context. Therefore, we can put into law legal decidability about the truth of statements. Truth, reciprocity, proportionality statements. So nobody expected the end result to be law, right? Because the end result of the unification is law, because law is what is universally decidable. That's the weird part for me.
It is very weird.
Because that's what law is. It's the science of decidability. Now, in other words, decidability is merely an aspect of cooperation. But if it doesn't involve cooperation, it doesn't matter if it's true.
Doesn't need decidability.
Doesn't need decidability. So anyway, so that's what we're doing. And, you know, I think I might have exhausted myself.
You did some good work. It was a lot of work.
If I haven't exhausted myself, we could do, though we're going to be on tomorrow. Yes, are we on tomorrow?
That's the plan. Yes.
Okay. We could go through and just enumerate what we're trying to create, right? The first principles of existence, and then we can continue what we started yesterday, which is starting in the middle and working out.
That's fine. It depends on what you want to do at this moment. You are the host, so you can share your screen at will. And it depends if you want to give it a go or
I think I'd like to summarize
okay.
What we're trying to create. All right. So if you would mind, can I share my screen?
Yes.
I'm just trying to judge whether I have the energy left or not. That's
Right.
all. Can you see what are we trying to create?
Yes.
Okay. Hello.
Right.
I might have to do something else here. Why am I having- Vocabulary. Can you see this?
Yes. That's what I was looking for.
Um, Paradigm of vocabulary, logic, grammar. Yes. No, it's not. All right, so that's what we're trying to produce. Do I have to say why?
I'm looking at that last sentence. It's the,
I haven't got that. I don't feel good about that one yet.
I like it. It's a human expression. Including those things.
Technically, a grammar includes a syntax. So, what is that? It's going to, so, this is up. Let's do this. Let's do that up. Okay.
You mean testifiable or testable? That you just fixed it.
Mhm.
Above geometry. I thought you were going to write testifiable and not testable.
Okay.
As an editorial comment there, would you, I'm looking at operational grammar as a term of art.
you laughing at me for? What do I do now?
It was just the way you skinned the cat. It was just, that's just art.
Well, because in the back of my head, I'm thinking about what's the underlying HTML. How do I make sure it doesn't get messy?
That's crazy, man. That's crazy, Bill, right there.
Okay, so that's what we're trying to, and this. Completes the Wilsonian uniting the formal, physical, behavioral, and evolutionary sciences into a single okay.
So it is, then I would,
Okay. Does this meet your approval yet?
it's pretty good. The, I would say this, the question, what are we trying to create, is false. What are we creating? Because it is being done.
So is this?
That's funny right there, because they are the same, regardless of whether or not they're true or false.
Yes. All right. A series.
It's a series of, it's a set of series, isn't it?
So how is it so? So it's just math is a system of measurement. Math is the science of measurement of constant relations expressible by positional names.
Right.
Operational grammar is the natural laws of science of measurement of all human experience, right? Especially those things of qualitative, and ordinal and qualitative, but not necessarily cardinal measures. And that's because it's so dimensionally complex compared to most math. I mean, really, if you look at, I wish they would actually, math can be written as language or as symbols. But if you went through what, you went through, what's the symbol for fields? If you went through the mechanics of the quantum field, the math of it, and you actually drew it out, it's really annoying at what they're doing in there, and it's complicated in the sense that it's complicated, but it's not as language, it's understandable. But that's a real problem because what they call about superposition, right? Superposition is a bunch of things acting together, producing an outcome. And the difference in quantum mechanics is that's what quantum means, is that if it's a digital function in the sense that if there isn't enough energy, it doesn't do anything. It only matters if it reaches a cliff, right? So the same thing is here, is that we're talking about a lot of dimensions that result in a superposition we call an action, right? It's just that those dimensions are complicated, right? And there's a lot of them, and we can't introspect on them. I mean, I know I can move my arm around, but I can't figure out how the hell I tell it to do that, right? And once you figure out, you see what the brain is doing to make that happen, it's a freaking miracle. It's no wonder apes do stuff like this and we do stuff like this, because computationally, oh my freaking God, that's hard.
Wait.
All right,
I'm doing that.
What?
I'm raising my mug with my superior handle in my grip.
I bet we get more comments on the
Tankards.
on the symbolism of cup handles than we do on the rest of the video.
It was a beautiful work, Kurt. I want to thank you for doing that. That was excellent exposition. I will give you some notes as well as a copy of the video as soon as it gets compiled, I guess.
Okay, princess.
No, that will be this. That will be this.
Sorry, I just screwed that up. No, it's the other way. Is that I got a email from Lilia, or a message from Lilia over here.
Oh,
My brain just Freudian slipped them together. Okay, boss, was what I want to say, and princess came out because she's a princess. Huh?
I can live with it either way, buddy. I tell people ask me how do you say my name? I'm like, I've been called worse by uglier people.
All right, love you, brother.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
Take care.